The text message glowed on my phone screen like a neon sign in the darkness of my apartment. Do you ever think about us? 5 simple words from Henry that had the power to unravel 5 years of carefully constructed emotional walls. I set the phone down on my coffee table and stared at it, my heart hammering against my ribs as if it were trying to escape the cage I'd built around it. If this story hits you, drop a heart in the comments. Us. What did he mean by us? The question had been sitting in my inbox for 3 hours now, and I'd read it approximately 50 times, each reading making my chest tighter and my palms sweatier. I knew exactly what he meant, of course. I'd always known. But acknowledging it meant opening a door I'd spent years learning how to keep locked. I pushed myself off the couch and walked to my kitchen window, looking out at the city lights blurring through the glass. 5 years. 5 years since graduation, since I'd convinced myself that what I felt for Henry was just gratitude mixed with hero worship. 5 years of telling myself that the way my stomach flipped when he smiled at me was just friendship, that the way I memorized every detail of his face was just appreciation for someone who'd saved me from the worst parts of college. But Henry's text had shattered that illusion in an instant, and now I was drowning in memories I'd worked so hard to bury. I could see him so clearly in my mind, tall and confident, with dark hair that always looked like he'd just run his fingers through it, and those warm brown eyes that seemed to see right through whatever mask I was wearing. He'd been a junior when I was a terrified freshman, stumbling through the dining hall with my tray, trying to find somewhere to sit where I wouldn't become the target of another round of cruel jokes about my clothes, my voice, my everything. Hey, there's room here. That was the first thing Henry ever said to me, gesturing to the empty chair across from him in the crowded cafeteria. I'd been standing there like an idiot, scanning the room for a safe haven, when his voice cut through my panic. I remember thinking he was talking to someone else, someone cooler, someone who belonged. But when I looked around, he was looking directly at me, and his smile was genuine. That was the beginning of everything. Henry became my shield against the world. When Brad Morrison and his crew would corner me in the library, making loud comments about my obvious sexuality, Henry would appear like some kind of guardian angel, his presence alone enough to make them back off. When Professor Chen paired me with the guy who'd spent weeks making my life hell in chemistry lab, Henry somehow convinced the professor to let him switch partners with me instead. When I got locked out of my dorm room in nothing but a towel, courtesy of my roommate's idea of a harmless prank, Henry was the one who brought me clothes and helped me get back inside. Every act of protection, every moment of kindness, every time he chose to stand beside me when everyone else was content to watch me fall, it all added up to something I was too scared to name. But late at night, alone in my narrow dorm bed, I'd replay every interaction, every laugh, every time his hand brushed mine when he passed me notes in the classes we shared. I'd imagine what it would be like if he looked at me the way I looked at him, if his protection came from something deeper than just basic human decency. But Henry was popular, confident, seemingly straight. He dated girls, beautiful, effortless girls who didn't need defending, who fit into his world without question. And I was just the grateful kid he'd taken under his wing, the charity case who should be thankful for friendship and nothing more. So I buried it. I buried the way my pulse quickened when he texted me. I buried the jealousy that burned in my chest when I saw him with his girlfriends. I buried the fantasy that maybe, just maybe, his protection meant something more than pity. I convinced myself that what I felt was just a crush, a natural response to someone who'd shown me kindness when I needed it most. After graduation, it became easier to maintain the lie. Henry moved across the country for his job, and our daily conversations became weekly calls, then monthly check-ins, then holiday texts. The distance helped me pretend that what I'd felt was just a phase, a confused response to a difficult time in my life. I dated other guys, had relationships that lasted months or even a year, and told myself I was over whatever childish infatuation I'd harbored for my college protector. But now he was back in town, and that text message had demolished every wall I'd built. Do you ever think about us? The question implied that there had been an us to think about, that those moments of connection I'd treasured and then dismissed had been real, mutual, significant. I picked up my phone again, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. How do you respond to a question that could change everything? How do you tell someone that you've thought about them every day for 5 years, that you've compared every relationship to the impossible standard of how safe you felt in their presence, that you've been in love with them since you were 19 years old and too scared to admit it even to yourself? My phone buzzed with another message from Henry. I know it's a weird question, but I've been thinking about you a lot since I moved back. About how things were between us. About how things could have been different. My hands were shaking now. This wasn't just curiosity or nostalgia. This was Henry opening a door I'd been staring at for years, too terrified to turn the handle. He was asking if I'd ever wondered about the same things that had kept me awake countless nights, the same possibilities that had made every other relationship feel like a pale imitation of what I really wanted. I set the phone down again and closed my eyes, letting myself remember not just the protection Henry had given me, but the way he looked at me sometimes when he thought I wasn't paying attention. The way his smile had been different when it was just for me. The way he'd found excuses to spend time together even when I wasn't in immediate danger from campus bullies. Maybe I hadn't been imagining it after all. Maybe the connection I'd felt had been real, and I'd been too scared and too convinced of my own unworthiness to see it. Maybe Henry's question wasn't just about the past. Maybe it was about the future, about possibilities that were still within reach if I could find the courage to be honest. The truth was, I'd never stopped thinking about us. I'd never stopped wondering what would have happened if I'd been brave enough to tell him how I felt, if I'd trusted that his protection came from love rather than obligation. I'd never stopped hoping that someday, somehow, we'd find our way back to each other. Now, staring at his messages in the dim light of my apartment, I realized that someday might be today. The question was whether I was finally ready to stop running from the truth that had been chasing me for 5 years, whether I was brave enough to admit that Henry hadn't just offended me in college, he'd captured my heart, and I'd never gotten it back. The memory hits me like a physical blow, transporting me back to the dining hall on a Tuesday morning in October. I was 18, barely 3 weeks into my freshman year, sitting alone at a corner table with my untouched breakfast growing cold. The harassment had started almost immediately after I'd arrived on campus. Whispered slurs in the hallways, deliberate shoulder checks between classes, cruel laughter that followed me everywhere I went. I tried to make myself invisible, but somehow that only made me more of a target. That morning, 3 upperclassmen had cornered me near the cereal dispensers, their voices carrying across the dining hall as they made increasingly vicious comments about my appearance, my mannerisms, everything they decided made me different. I remember standing there frozen, my face burning with humiliation as other students turned to stare. Some looked away uncomfortably, others smirked, but no one moved to help. Then Henry appeared. "Is there a problem here?" His voice cut through their laughter like a blade. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of quiet confidence that made people step back without thinking. The 3 guys who'd been tormenting me suddenly looked like children caught stealing candy. "Just having a conversation," one of them mumbled, but Henry's steady gaze never wavered. "Conversation's over," he said simply, and somehow that was enough. They slunk away, leaving me standing there shaking, still holding an empty bowl. Henry turned to me then, his expression softening. "You okay?" he asked, and I nodded even though I wasn't, even though I felt like I might collapse from the mixture of relief and lingering terror. "I'm Henry," he said, extending his hand. "Junior, business major, and apparently your new dining hall bodyguard." That was the beginning of everything. Over the following weeks, Henry became my shadow in the best possible way. He'd appear whenever the harassment started, his presence alone enough to scatter my tormentors. He'd sit with me in the library when I was studying alone, walk with me across campus when I looked nervous, include me in conversations with his friends when I was standing awkwardly on the periphery of social groups. But it wasn't just the protection that made me fall for him, it was the way he saw me. While everyone else seemed to look through me or at me with disgust, Henry looked at me like I was worth knowing. He asked about my classes, my hometown, my dreams. He listened when I talked about wanting to be a graphic designer, and he never made me feel like my interests were strange or feminine or wrong. I remember one evening in November when we were studying together in his dorm room. I'd been working on a design project, sketching logo concepts while he read for his economics class. The room was quiet except for the scratch of my pencil and the occasional rustle of pages. When I looked up, I caught him watching me work, his expression soft and focused. "You're really talented," he said quietly, and something in his voice made my heart skip. "I love watching you create things." I felt my face flush, and I looked back down at my sketch pad, trying to hide the effect his words had on me. That was the moment I knew I was in trouble, the moment I realized my gratitude had transformed into something much more dangerous. The protection continued throughout that year and into the next. Henry would find me in study groups where other students were making me uncomfortable, smoothly redirecting conversations when they turned cruel. He'd show up at campus events where I was standing alone, effortlessly including me in his circle. He defended me in ways both big and small, from confronting outright bullies to simply making sure I was never completely isolated. But I never told him how I felt. How could I? He was my protector, my savior, the one person who made college bearable. The thought of confessing my feelings and losing him was unbearable. So I buried them deep, convinced myself that what I felt was just intense gratitude, that the way my pulse quickened when he smiled at me was just friendship. Even when we'd stay up late talking in his room, sharing secrets and dreams, even when he'd fall asleep during movie nights and I'd watch him breathe in the flickering light of the television. Even when he'd hug me goodbye after particularly difficult days and I'd want to never let go, I told myself it was all platonic. By senior year, I'd become an expert at compartmentalizing my feelings. I dated other people, went through the motions of normal college relationships, all while knowing that none of them would ever compare to Henry. He dated too, a series of casual relationships that never seemed to last more than a few months. I told myself I was happy for him, that I wanted him to find someone who made him happy, but inside I was dying a little each time. After graduation, we kept in touch sporadically. A few texts here and there, the occasional social media interaction, but life pulled us in different directions. I moved to the city, threw myself into my career as a graphic designer, built a life that looked successful from the outside. I dated, had a few serious relationships, but nothing ever felt quite right. There was always something missing, some standard I couldn't quite articulate that no one seemed to meet. Now, 5 years later, I'm sitting in my apartment staring at Henry's text message, and I realize that standard was him. It was always him. The rational part of my brain tries to find alternative explanations for his question. Maybe he's writing a memoir about college and wants to include our friendship. Maybe he's curious about how I remember those days. Maybe he's just nostalgic and wondering if I ever think about our old group of friends. But my heart knows better. There was something in the way he looked at me during our coffee reunion last week, something in the way he lingered when we hugged goodbye, something in the careful way he asked about my dating life. The same careful attention he used to pay to my emotional state when he was protecting me from bullies. I set my phone down and walked to my window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Henry is probably wondering if I'll respond to his text, if I'll be brave enough to acknowledge what he's really asking. The question isn't whether I think about us. The question is whether I'm finally ready to admit that I never stopped. Raymond stares at his phone for the third time in 10 minutes, Henry's message still glowing on the screen like a question mark branded into his retinas. Do you ever think about us? The words have been circling his mind for 2 days now, ever since their coffee meeting at that little cafe downtown where Henry had looked exactly the same but somehow completely different. Broader shoulders, more confident smile. The same protective energy that had once made Raymond feel like the safest person on campus. He sets the phone aside and tries to focus on the logo design spread across his desk, but his mind keeps drifting back to yesterday's conversation. They talked for 3 hours about everything and nothing, Henry's new marketing job, Raymond's freelance clients, the way their old campus had changed. But underneath every casual exchange, Raymond had felt something electric, something that made his chest tight with the same breathless anticipation he'd experienced as a 19-year-old watching Henry approach his table in the dining hall. The worst part is how natural it felt. How easily they'd fallen back into their old rhythm of Henry making him laugh until his sides hurt, of Raymond hanging on every word like Henry's opinions were the most important things in the world. 5 years of carefully constructed emotional distance had crumbled in the space of a single afternoon, and now Raymond feels like he's 19 again, vulnerable and desperate and completely transparent. His phone buzzes with a text from Henry. Want to grab dinner tomorrow? I found this Thai place that actually has decent pad CEW. Raymond's heart does something embarrassing in his chest, and he has to remind himself that friends invite friends to dinner. Friends text about restaurant recommendations. Friends don't read romantic subtext into every casual interaction. But then he remembers the way Henry had looked at him when they were saying goodbye yesterday, how his hand had lingered on Raymond's shoulder just a moment too long, and Raymond wonders if he's the only one feeling this gravitational pull between them. Henry's question keeps echoing in his mind, and Raymond realizes he's been thinking about us for 5 years straight, through every failed date, every lonely Friday night, every moment when he'd catch himself comparing other men to the memory of Henry's laugh. He types back, "Yes, but only if you promise not to judge me for ordering mild." It's the kind of response that feels safe, friendly, normal. But his hands are shaking as he sends it, because even agreeing to dinner feels like stepping off a cliff. Henry's response comes immediately. "I've seen you eat cereal for breakfast, lunch, and dinner." I'm not judging anyone's spice tolerance. The casual familiarity of it makes Raymond's chest ache with longing. Henry remembers his terrible eating habits from college, Remembers the way Raymond would survive on Lucky Charms during finals week because he was too stressed to cook real food. Raymond finds himself scrolling through their old photos on social media, pictures from college parties and study sessions where Henry's arm is always casually draped around Raymond's shoulders. In every single photo, Raymond looks like he's glowing, like being near Henry is the most natural thing in the world. He wonders if anyone else could see what he was feeling, if it was obvious to everyone except Henry himself. The memory of their last night before graduation hits him like a physical blow. They'd been sitting on the steps of the library at 2 in the morning, both slightly drunk on cheap beer and the melancholy of ending. Henry had been talking about his job prospects, about moving to Chicago, about how much he was going to miss their friendship. And Raymond had almost said it then, had almost told Henry that he'd been in love with him since the first time Henry had stood up to those guys in the dining hall, since the first time Henry had made him feel like he was worth protecting. But he'd chickened out, convinced himself that Henry was just being sentimental, that their friendship was too precious to risk on feelings that might not be reciprocated. So he'd said something generic about staying in touch, about how college friendships were the best kind, and Henry had nodded and hugged him goodbye like Raymond hadn't just let the most important moment of his life slip through his fingers. Now, 5 years later, Raymond wonders if Henry's question is a second chance or just friendly curiosity. He thinks about all the ways he could respond: casual deflection, honest confession, something in between that leaves room for interpretation. But every option feels loaded with the potential for disaster. His phone rings, and Henry's name appears on the screen. Raymond's heart lurches as he answers. "Hey." Henry's voice is warm, familiar, with that slight rasp that Raymond has never forgotten. "I know this is random, but I'm driving past our old campus and I keep thinking about that time you got locked out of your dorm in December. Remember? You called me at midnight and I had to bring you my spare coat." Raymond remembers. He remembers standing in the snow in just a t-shirt and jeans, shivering and mortified, and Henry showing up 20 minutes later with not just a coat but hot chocolate from the vending machine and a spare key card he'd somehow convinced the RA to give him. He remembers how Henry had wrapped the coat around his shoulders and said, "You're going to catch pneumonia, you idiot." But his voice had been so gentle, so concerned, that Raymond had fallen a little deeper in love right there in the snow. "I remember," Raymond says softly. "You saved my life that night." "I saved you from a cold," Henry corrects, but there's something in his voice that makes Raymond's breath catch. "Though I guess I was always trying to save you from something back then, wasn't I?" The question hangs between them, heavy with implication. Raymond closes his eyes and lets himself imagine, just for a moment, that Henry is asking what he thinks he's asking. That Henry's protection had been about more than friendship, that all those times he'd stepped between Raymond and the world had been acts of love rather than simple kindness. "Henry," Raymond starts, but he doesn't know how to finish. How do you tell someone that they've been the standard by which you've measured every relationship since? How do you explain that their friendship was the most romantic thing that ever happened to you, even though nothing romantic ever actually happened? "I should let you go," Henry says, and Raymond can hear the uncertainty in his voice. "But Raymond, when you think about that question I asked, just be honest, okay? With yourself, I mean. We're not kids anymore." The line goes dead, and Raymond sits in his apartment, staring at the phone and feeling like the ground has shifted beneath his feet. Henry's words echo in his mind. Just be honest, okay? And Raymond realizes that honesty is the one thing he's never allowed himself when it comes to Henry. He spent 5 years telling himself that his feelings were just gratitude, just admiration, just the natural affection between close friends. But sitting here now, with Henry's voice still echoing in his ears and the memory of that snowy night burning bright in his chest, Raymond finally admits the truth to himself. He's been in love with Henry since college. And every day since graduation has been an exercise in pretending otherwise. Henry's question isn't just making him think about them. It's making him realize that he's never stopped thinking about them, never stopped hoping that someday Henry might see him as more than just someone who needed protecting. The realization is terrifying and exhilarating all at once, and Raymond knows that tomorrow's dinner is going to change everything, one way or another. The Thai restaurant buzzed with Friday night energy, but all Raymond could focus on was the way Henry's laugh carried over the ambient noise as he chatted with their server. They'd been here for an hour, and every moment felt simultaneously natural and electric. Henry had chosen the seat across from him, close enough that their knees occasionally brushed under the small table, sending jolts of awareness through Raymond's body. "Remember when you tried to order pad thai at that campus food truck, and they gave you the spiciest thing on the menu?" Henry asked, grinning as he twirled lo mein around his chopsticks. Raymond nearly choked on his water. You mean when you had to buy me 3 cartons of milk because I was literally crying? Hey, I warned you about the 5-star rating. Henry's eyes crinkled with amusement. But you were so determined to prove you could handle it. I was 18 and trying to impress you, Raymond said before he could stop himself. The words hung between them, heavier than he'd intended. Henry's expression shifted, becoming more serious. Were you? Trying to impress me? Raymond's heart hammered against his ribs. This was exactly the kind of moment he'd been dreading and craving in equal measure. I guess I was always trying to impress you back then. You were this confident junior who actually gave a damn about the weird freshman getting picked on. You weren't weird, Henry said quietly, leaning forward. You were just yourself. Completely, authentically yourself. Do you know how rare that is? The intensity in Henry's voice made Raymond's chest tight. I didn't feel authentic. I felt like I was drowning most days, and you were the only person who threw me a lifeline. Is that all it was to you? A lifeline. The question felt loaded, dangerous. Raymond studied Henry's face, searching for clues about where this conversation was heading. What do you mean? I mean. Henry paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. When I texted you that question the other day about us, I wasn't just being nostalgic. I've been thinking about our friendship a lot since I moved back. About how it felt different from other friendships I had. Raymond's pulse quickened. Different how? More intense. More protective, I guess. Like when Brad Morrison cornered you after that economics lecture, I wanted to do more than just tell him to back off. I wanted to make sure he never looked at you wrong again. The memory hit Raymond like a physical blow. Brad Morrison, with his cruel smile and his friends laughing as he'd mimicked Raymond's stutter during a class presentation. Henry had appeared seemingly out of nowhere, stepping between them with a quiet authority that had made Brad and his crew slink away without another word. I never thanked you properly for that, Raymond said, his voice barely above a whisper. You didn't need to thank me. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Henry reached across the table, his fingers brushing Raymond's knuckles. Protecting you never felt like a choice. It felt like something I had to do. Something I wanted to do. Raymond stared at their hands, Henry's thumb now tracing gentle circles against his skin. Henry, what are you saying? I'm saying that maybe what we had wasn't just friendship. Maybe it was something I was too young or too scared to name back then. The restaurant seemed to fade around them. Raymond could hear his own breathing, could feel the warmth of Henry's touch spreading up his arm. And now I'm older. Less scared, maybe. And seeing you again, talking to you like this, it's bringing back all those feelings I thought I'd left behind in college. Raymond's throat felt thick with emotion. What feelings? Henry's eyes met his directly, unflinching. The feeling that you were the most important person in my world. That making sure you were okay was the most important thing I could do with my day. That watching you smile felt like winning something. Henry. Raymond's voice cracked. I know it's complicated, Henry continued, his grip on Raymond's hand tightening slightly. I know we've been apart for 5 years, and maybe I'm reading too much into things. But when you looked at me during coffee the other day, when you got that expression on your face like you were seeing something you'd missed, I thought maybe you felt it too. Raymond's mind raced. This was everything he dreamed of hearing, everything he convinced himself would never happen. But the vulnerability in Henry's voice, the way he was looking at Raymond like he was afraid of the answer, made it impossible to hide behind his usual defenses. I did feel it, Raymond admitted, his voice barely audible. I felt it then, and I'm feeling it now. Henry's face transformed, relief and something deeper flooding his features. Yeah. Raymond took a shaky breath. But Henry, I need to tell you something. What I felt for you in college, it wasn't just gratitude or friendship. It was bigger than that. Scarier than that. Tell me. Raymond looked around the restaurant, suddenly aware of how public this conversation was. Can we go somewhere else? This feels too important for pad thai and background music. Henry was already signaling for the check. My place. 20 minutes later, they stood in Henry's living room, the space still half filled with unpacked boxes from his recent move. The casual intimacy of being in Henry's personal space, seeing his books scattered on the coffee table and his jacket thrown over a chair, made everything feel more real and more terrifying. Okay, Henry said, turning to face him. Tell me. Raymond walked to the window, looking out at the city lights while he gathered his courage. I was in love with you, he said finally. Completely, desperately in love with you. Every time you defended me, every time you checked in on me, every time you just saw me when everyone else was looking through me, I fell a little deeper. He heard Henry's sharp intake of breath behind him. I used to lie awake at night thinking about what it would be like to tell you, Raymond continued, his reflection wavering in the window glass. But you were this amazing person who was going places, and I was just the kid you felt sorry for. I convinced myself that what you were doing was charity, not whatever this was. Raymond. Henry's voice was closer now, right behind him. Look at me. Raymond turned, and the expression on Henry's face nearly undid him. There was wonder there, and something that looked like grief. You thought I felt sorry for you? Didn't you? No. Henry shook his head emphatically. God, no. I defended you because seeing anyone hurt you felt like they were hurting me. I checked on you because your happiness mattered to me more than my own. I saw you because you were impossible not to see. Then why didn't you ever? Because I was 21 and terrified, Henry said simply. Because I'd never felt anything like that before, and I didn't know what to do with it. Because you were younger and going through enough without me adding my confusion to the mix. Raymond felt tears prick at his eyes. So we were both scared. Apparently. Henry stepped closer, close enough that Raymond could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. But we're not 21 anymore. No, Raymond agreed, his heart pounding so hard he was sure Henry could hear it. We're not. So what do we do now? Raymond looked at this man who had shaped so much of his college experience, who had been the standard against which he'd measured every relationship since. Henry, who was looking at him like he was something precious, something worth protecting and cherishing. I don't know, Raymond whispered. I'm still scared. Of what? Of losing you again. Of this being too good to be true. Of waking up tomorrow and finding out I imagined this whole conversation. Henry reached up, his fingers brushing Raymond's cheek with infinite gentleness. You didn't imagine it. I'm here, and I'm telling you that what I felt for you in college was real. What I'm feeling for you now is real. What are you feeling now? Like I want to kiss you, Henry said, his voice rough with honesty. Like I've wanted to kiss you for 7 years, and I'm tired of pretending otherwise. Raymond's breath caught. Henry. Tell me to stop if you don't want this, Henry murmured, his thumb tracing Raymond's jawline. Tell me to stop, and we'll figure out how to be friends. But if you want this too. I want this, Raymond breathed, the words tumbling out before he could second-guess them. I've wanted this for so long I forgot what it felt like to want anything else. Henry's smile was soft and devastating. Then stop being scared. We've already lost 5 years. I don't want to lose any more time. Raymond nodded, his eyes falling closed as Henry leaned in, their foreheads touching. Okay, he whispered. Okay. The weight of Henry's confession hung between us like a bridge I'd been too afraid to cross for years. His words echoed in my mind, that defending me hadn't just been about friendship, that he'd been protecting someone he cared about in ways he couldn't understand at the time. The vulnerability in his voice when he admitted he'd always wondered about us made my chest tight with possibility and terror. I stood there in his living room, the remnants of our Thai dinner forgotten on the coffee table, watching Henry's face in the soft lamplight. His eyes held mine with an intensity that reminded me of those moments in college when he'd step between me and whoever was making my life hell. But this time, he wasn't protecting me from someone else. He was offering to protect what we could become together. Raymond, he said quietly, taking a step closer. I need you to know that asking you about us wasn't casual curiosity. I've been thinking about this for months, ever since I decided to move back here. You were part of that decision. My heart hammered against my ribs. What do you mean? I took this job partly because I knew you were still here. I've spent 5 years wondering what would have happened if I'd been brave enough to tell you how I felt before graduation. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I remembered from our late-night study sessions. I was scared then. Scared of ruining what we had. Scared of making things harder for you when you were already dealing with so much. The honesty in his voice broke something open in my chest. All these years, I convinced myself that my feelings were one-sided, that Henry had simply been a good friend doing the right thing. But hearing him admit to his own fear, his own uncertainty, made me realize we'd both been protecting ourselves from the same possibility. I was scared too, I whispered. I thought if I told you how I felt, you'd think I was just some confused kid who'd mistaken gratitude for something else. Henry's expression softened. Is that what you think it was? Gratitude. I shook my head slowly. No, not anymore. Maybe not ever. I took a shaky breath. Henry, when you defended me in college, it wasn't just that you were standing up for me. It was the way you looked at me afterward, like you were checking to make sure I was really okay. The way you'd find me later and ask if I wanted to grab coffee or study together. You made me feel like I mattered. You did matter. You do matter. The simple certainty in his voice made my eyes burn. I've been in love with you since I was 19 years old, I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. Every relationship I've tried to have since then has failed because I kept comparing everyone to you. To the way you made me feel safe and seen and worth protecting. Henry's breath caught. Raymond. I know it's not fair to put that on you, I continued, needing to get it all out. I know we were both different people then, and maybe what I felt was just the intensity of being young and scared and grateful. But seeing you again, talking to you like this, I don't think it was just gratitude. I think it was love, and I think it still is. The silence that followed felt enormous. Henry was looking at me like he was seeing me for the first time, and maybe he was. Maybe we were both seeing each other clearly for the first time, without the filter of youth and fear and the weight of unspoken things. I need to tell you something, Henry said finally. Those guys who used to give you hell, Marcus and his friends, they came after me too, after I started defending you. Called me names, said I must be gay too if I cared so much about protecting you. My stomach dropped. Henry, I never knew. I'm sorry, I never meant for you to. No, he interrupted, stepping closer. That's not why I'm telling you this. I'm telling you because they weren't wrong. Not about me being gay, anyway. I just wasn't ready to admit it to myself, let alone anyone else. The revelation hit me like a physical force. You're gay. Yeah, have been all along, I think. But I was so deep in denial, so terrified of what it meant, that I convinced myself my feelings for you were just protective instincts. Big brother syndrome or something. He laughed, but it was shaky. Turns out you can't protect someone you're falling in love with without eventually having to face what that means. I felt tears prick my eyes. All this time, we've both been running from the same thing. Henry reached out tentatively, his fingers brushing mine. I've dated women, tried to make it work, but it never felt right. And the whole time, I kept thinking about you. About us. About what we could have been if we'd been braver. The touch of his hand sent electricity up my arm. What are you saying? I'm saying I don't want to run anymore. His fingers intertwined with mine, solid and warm. I'm saying that moving back here, reaching out to you, asking you about us, it was all because I'm finally ready to be brave enough for both of us. I stared at our joined hands, hardly able to believe this was real. Henry, what if we try this, and it doesn't work? What if we're better as friends? What if we don't try and spend the rest of our lives wondering? He countered gently. Raymond, I've spent 5 years regretting that I never told you how I felt. I don't want to spend the next 5 years the same way. His thumb traced across my knuckles, and I felt something shift inside me. The fear was still there, but it was being overshadowed by something stronger. Hope. The kind of hope I'd buried so deep I'd forgotten it existed. I'm scared, I admitted. So am I, he said. But I'm more scared of losing you again. Of letting you walk away because I was too much of a coward to tell you that you've been the one I've been looking for all along. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with years of unspoken truth. I looked up at Henry's face, seeing the same vulnerability there that I felt in my own chest. This was the moment, the choice between safety and possibility, between protecting what we had and risking everything for what we could become. Okay, I whispered. Okay, let's be brave. I squeezed his hand. Let's try this. Let's see what happens when we stop running from each other. Henry's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. Really? Really? I felt a laugh bubble up from somewhere deep in my chest. I mean, we've already wasted 5 years being scared. What's the worst that could happen? We could fall in love, Henry said softly. I think we already did that, I replied. We just finally admitted it. The campus looked different in the evening light, shadows stretching across the familiar courtyard where so much of their story had begun. Raymond's hands trembled slightly as he waited by the old oak tree, the same spot where Henry had first stepped between him and a group of sneering upperclassmen 5 years ago. He'd suggested meeting here because some conversations needed the weight of history behind them, needed the ghosts of who they used to be as witnesses to who they were becoming. Henry appeared at the courtyard's edge, his silhouette backlit by the dormitory lights. He walked with that same confident stride Raymond remembered, but there was something different now, a vulnerability in his shoulders, a hesitation in his approach that made Raymond's chest tighten with recognition. They were both scared. After all these years, after all the distance and silence, they were both terrified of what came next. You picked the perfect spot, Henry said softly, stopping a few feet away. I can still see you standing right there, backpack clutched to your chest, looking like you wanted to disappear into the ground. Raymond's breath caught. You remember that? I remember everything about that day. Henry's voice carried the weight of confession. The way you tried to make yourself smaller when they started laughing. The way you looked at me afterward, like you couldn't believe someone had actually stepped in. I remember thinking I'd never seen anyone look so grateful and so beautiful at the same time. The words hung between them, years of unspoken truth finally given voice. Raymond felt his carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble, all the reasons he'd given himself for keeping quiet seeming suddenly insignificant compared to the raw honesty in Henry's eyes. "I need to tell you something," Raymond said, his voice barely above a whisper. "About that day, about all the days after. About why I could never really move on." Henry nodded, stepping closer until they were within arm's reach. "Tell me, I was in love with you." The words tumbled out in a rush, years of suppression breaking like a dam. "Not just grateful, not just dependent on your protection. I was completely, hopelessly in love with you. Every time you defended me, every time you made sure I had somewhere to sit in the dining hall, every time you walked me back to my dorm because you knew I was scared, I fell a little deeper." Henry's expression shifted, something raw and vulnerable crossing his features. "Raymond." "No, let me finish." Raymond's voice grew stronger, fueled by the momentum of finally speaking his truth. "I used to lie awake at night replaying every conversation we'd had, analyzing every smile, every time you'd put your hand on my shoulder. I convinced myself it was just friendship, that you were just being kind, because the alternative, that you might feel something too, was too dangerous to hope for." "Why dangerous?" "Because you were everything I needed. My protector, my friend, the person who made college bearable. If I'd told you how I felt and you'd pulled away." Raymond's voice cracked. "I would have lost the only good thing in my life." Henry was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the ground between them. When he looked up, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You want to know why I really defended you?" Henry asked, his voice thick with emotion. "It wasn't because I felt sorry for you. It wasn't because I thought you needed saving. It was because every time someone hurt you, it felt like they were hurting me too. Every cruel word, every laugh at your expense, it made me furious in a way I didn't understand." Raymond's heart hammered against his ribs. "Henry, I was so confused back then. I'd never felt protective of anyone the way I felt protective of you. I'd never wanted to shield someone from the world, to make sure they felt safe and valued and—" Henry paused, searching for words. "Loved. I wanted to make sure you felt loved, even when I couldn't admit to myself what that really meant." "What did it mean?" Raymond whispered. Henry stepped closer, close enough that Raymond could see the gold flecks in his eyes, the same eyes that had looked at him with such gentle concern all those years ago. "It meant I was falling in love with you too. Every single day. Every time I saw you smile because of something I'd done, every time you laughed at my terrible jokes, every time you looked at me like I was some kind of hero, I was falling deeper into something I was too scared to name." The confession hit Raymond like a physical force, stealing his breath and making his knees weak. "You were scared too?" "Terrified." Henry's laugh was shaky. "I was 20 years old, barely figuring out who I was, and suddenly there was this beautiful, brilliant freshman who made me want to be better, braver, more than I'd ever thought I could be. But I was also watching you get torn apart by people who couldn't handle difference, and I was so afraid that if I told you how I felt, you'd think I was just another person trying to take advantage of your vulnerability." Raymond felt tears sliding down his cheeks. "So we both stayed quiet." "We both stayed quiet," Henry confirmed. "And then graduation came, and you were going to stay in town for your internship, and I was moving 3 states away from my job, and I thought maybe the distance would make it easier. Maybe I could forget how it felt to be near you. Did you?" "Not for a single day." Henry's voice was raw with honesty. "I dated other people, tried to convince myself I was moving on, but everything felt like a pale imitation of what I'd felt with you. No one made me want to be protective the way you did. No one made me feel like I was exactly where I belonged just by being in the same room." Raymond reached out tentatively, his fingers brushing against Henry's hand. "When you texted me that question about thinking about us, I'd been carrying it around for months," Henry admitted, his fingers intertwining with Raymond's. "Ever since I knew I was moving back. I kept wondering if you'd felt it too, if those moments between us had been as real for you as they were for me. I was terrified you'd say no, that you'd tell me I'd imagined it all. And if I had said no?" Henry's smile was soft and sad. "Then I would have respected that. I would have been grateful just to have you back in my life as a friend. But I had to ask, Raymond. I couldn't spend another 5 years wondering what if." Standing there in the courtyard where their story began, surrounded by the ghosts of their younger selves, Raymond felt something shift inside him. The fear that had held him back for so long seemed suddenly small compared to the magnitude of what they were offering each other. "I don't want to wonder what if anymore either," Raymond said, his voice steady despite the tears on his cheeks. I want to know what happens when we're brave enough to try. Henry's smile was radiant, transforming his entire face. Are you sure? Because once we cross this line, there's no going back to just being friends who used to know each other. Raymond thought about all the years of longing, all the relationships that had felt incomplete, all the nights he'd fallen asleep thinking about a boy who'd made him feel safe in a world that often felt hostile. He thought about the man standing before him now, still protective, still caring, still looking at him like he was something precious worth defending. I've been in love with you for 5 years, Raymond said, his voice clear and certain. I don't want to go back. I want to go forward. Henry's response was to close the distance between them, his hands cupping Raymond's face with infinite gentleness. Then let's go forward together. When Henry kissed him, soft and sweet and full of years of unspoken longing, Raymond felt like he was finally coming home. The boy who'd needed protection and the man who'd provided it were both still there, but now they were something new, two people brave enough to love each other openly, honestly, without fear. They broke apart slowly, foreheads touching, breathing the same air in the space between them. So what happens now? Raymond asked. Henry's smile was full of promise. Now we get to find out what we're like when we're not afraid. 3 months later, Raymond woke up to the smell of coffee and the sound of Henry humming in the kitchen. The morning light filtered through the curtains of Henry's apartment, casting golden streaks across the bed they now shared. Raymond stretched, still marveling at how natural this felt, waking up next to the person who had protected him, loved him, and waited for him to be ready. Good morning, sleepyhead, Henry called from the doorway, holding 2 steaming mugs. He wore Raymond's old college sweatshirt, the one with the faded logo that had seen them through countless study sessions and late-night conversations. Now it meant something different, a symbol of how their lives had intertwined. Raymond sat up, accepting the coffee with a grateful smile. Have I mentioned lately that you're perfect? Only every day, Henry replied, settling beside him on the bed. But I don't mind hearing it again. The ease between them still surprised Raymond sometimes. After years of careful boundaries and suppressed feelings, he had expected their transition to romance to be awkward or complicated. Instead, it felt like coming home. Henry's protective instincts had evolved into something deeper, a partnership where they both felt safe to be vulnerable. So, Henry said, taking a sip of his coffee, ready for today? Raymond nodded, though his stomach fluttered with nervous energy. They were returning to their old college campus together, this time as partners. The university had invited Henry back as a guest speaker for a leadership seminar, and Raymond had taken the day off to accompany him. It would be their first time back since that evening in the courtyard where everything had changed. 2 hours later, they walked across the familiar quad hand in hand. Students hurried past with backpacks and coffee cups, lost in their own worlds of assignments and social drama. Raymond remembered being one of them, isolated, struggling, certain that no one understood what he was going through. Look, Henry said, pointing toward the dining hall where he had first defended Raymond from a group of particularly cruel upperclassmen. Remember that day? How could I forget? Raymond squeezed Henry's hand. You told them to find something better to do with their lives. I was so angry, Henry admitted. Not just at them, but at myself for not acting sooner. I've been watching them target you for weeks, and I kept telling myself it wasn't my place to interfere. What changed your mind? Henry paused, considering. I realized that protecting you felt like protecting a part of myself I was just beginning to understand. I couldn't stand by anymore. They continued walking, past the library where they had spent countless hours studying together, past the student center where Henry had confronted another group of harassers, past all the places where their friendship had deepened into something neither of them had been ready to name. At the campus coffee shop, they ran into Professor Martinez, who had taught the literature class where they first met. Her face lit up when she saw them together. Raymond, Henry, what a wonderful surprise. She embraced them both warmly. Are you two visiting together? Actually, Henry said, his arm sliding around Raymond's waist, Raymond is my boyfriend now. The words still sent a thrill through Raymond's chest. Boyfriend. After all these years of wondering and waiting, the label felt both monumental and perfectly natural. Professor Martinez beamed. I always wondered about you too. There was something special in the way you looked out for each other. After she left, Raymond turned to Henry. You introduced me as your boyfriend. Is that okay? Henry asked, though his confident smile suggested he already knew the answer. More than okay, Raymond replied. I never thought I'd hear you say it. They made their way to the student union, where Henry would be speaking to a group of student leaders about advocacy and allyship. Raymond watched from the back of the room as Henry addressed the crowd, sharing stories about the importance of standing up for others, about finding the courage to act when you see injustice. Sometimes, Henry said, his eyes finding Raymond's across the room, protecting someone else teaches you something about yourself. It shows you what matters, what you're willing to fight for, and who you're willing to become. After the presentation, several students approached Henry with questions and thanks. Raymond noticed a young freshman hovering at the edge of the group, clearly wanting to speak but too nervous to approach. The student reminded Raymond of himself at that age, uncertain, searching, afraid of taking up space. Raymond walked over quietly. "Hey," he said gently. "Did you want to talk to Henry? He's really approachable, I promise." The student looked up with grateful eyes. What he said about advocacy really resonated with me. I've been dealing with some stuff on campus, and I wasn't sure if I should speak up." "Speaking up can be scary," Raymond acknowledged. "But sometimes the people who need to hear your voice are waiting for someone brave enough to use it." Henry appeared beside them, having finished with the other students. "Everything okay over here?" Raymond made the introductions and watched as Henry gave the young student the same focused attention he had once given Raymond. The same protective instincts, the same genuine care. Raymond felt his heart swell with pride and love. Later, as they walked back to their car, Henry slipped his hand into Raymond's. "Thank you for encouraging that student to talk to me. He really needed to hear that someone cared." "I learned from the best," Raymond replied. "You taught me what it looks like when someone fights for you. And you taught me what it means to be worth fighting for," Henry said, stopping to face him. "I love you, Raymond. Not just for who you were in college, but for who you've become, who you're still becoming." Raymond kissed him then, right there on the campus where their story began. Students walked past, some smiling at the sight of two men clearly in love, others too absorbed in their own lives to notice. But Raymond noticed everything, the way Henry's hand cupped his face, the way their bodies fit together, the way this moment felt like both an ending and a beginning. "I love you too," Raymond whispered against Henry's lips. "Thank you for defending me all those years ago. Thank you for waiting for me to be ready." "Thank you for being ready now," Henry replied. "Thank you for taking the risk." As they drove home together, Raymond reflected on how different his life looked now. The shy, frightened college student had grown into someone capable of love, of trust, of partnership. And Henry, his protector, his friend, his love, had been there through every transformation. Their relationship was built on a foundation of mutual care that had only deepened with time. What had started as one person defending another had evolved into two people choosing each other, again and again, with full knowledge of what they were risking and what they stood to gain. Raymond reached over and took Henry's hand as they pulled into their driveway. Home. Together. Finally ready for whatever came next.